Chapter 4, Comparison and Contrastation with Classic Models. Freud and Piaget both devised correlation models regarding time versus impact of influence, Freud's a rigid psychosexual model, and Piaget's a dynamic developmental schema. While there is some similarity in construct, neither model attempts to address the mind as a linear timeline, manifestation modality, while that presented within does so explicitly, relying directly on temporal expenditure and cyclic environment base factor structures. Freud's psychosexual model. And I'll just hold up a diagram. This is inexact. Freud's model is confusing because it changed throughout his teaching and has been developed and adapted. So here you can see where are we here? You can see the id, the superego, the ego, and I put self at the top. Self, or the idea of I, is something that has been discussed throughout as being a marker of human evolution and development. That I don't disagree with. I think I completed kind of the pyramid the way that Freud was trying to express it. I don't agree with it. I think the superego supersedes the ego, and it made me always wonder why he would add super onto the ego and replace the ego above it. That being said, we'll continue on with our discussion as to Freudian organization of the psyche. Sigmund Freud's theory of psychoanalysis relies on the precepts of animal instincts and desires, overarching nurturance, ordinance, and significant influence by the world of the developing child. This all translates into a model that has the id, unconscious or it, unconscious desires, drives, as base facet, upon which an ego, consciousness as interaction within self, is founded, that only partially interacts with the superego, preconscious concepts of limitation imposed by social action, the ultimate realization of influential governance. His insistence that we don't understand the unconscious mind is contrary to the theory of psychoanalysis itself, whereby the analysis of latent and repressed urges and feelings suggests we are capable of doing so, even if not in complete mindful awareness. The pleasure principle that guides the id, the logic and reality principle, that governs the ego and internalized factors controlling the superego, all have a way of taking from the idea of a tiered structure of consciousness, ending up as self-defeating when self-control overrides instinct patterning, or autonomy creates individuality beyond a parent's rules. Psychosexual theory explained. Further to the three-part structure of the psyche, there is a stage system that determines psychological growth based on natural functions, particularly of the mouth, genitals, and anus, and enjoyment or stress that is derived from stimulation thereto. Expulsion and gratification are linked with self-satisfaction derived from self-denial. The 5 stages stop at puberty, where Freud's interest in development seems to end. This is all contrary to the advanced system of analysis used to treat his patients, such as the concepts of repression, sublimation, projection, rationalization, and regression, as well as reaction formation, which can still have clinical relevance as a means in which to frame recovery or development of self-awareness. The overlapping tiers, the strange connection to bodily functions, and moving association in the sense of time between arrested development and manifest disturbance have contributed to the evidence that strongly refutes psychosexual analytic therapy as valid. Dissimilarity with the new model. And once again, we have an ancient model that comes from Germanic culture, Norse Viking culture, and we can actually see it in Mayan, Egyptian, Persian. I'm sure there's evidence. I'm not that familiar with Indonesian and Chinese culture, but the relative strength of the triangle or the arch can be seen throughout culture as having some very profound significance. The similarity with the new model. The structures herein differ immensely from Freud's model in that they represent a continuation of earlier and sometimes ancient ideas surrounding how the mind works. An example of this is the pyramid model with rising projection, adapted from a single triangle with a division of two above it. The current model giving rise to multidimensional self, life, and will-mind construct of higher function, built on the foundation of identity, person, and form. Another difference is that the temporal dynamic follows a course over the entire lifespan, as opposed to being a focal point on a particular period of time. Freud's strategies of coping have been adapted to the modern world, as they represent a more complex idea of what actions are manifest when these mechanisms are engaged. As such, these models are dissimilar, and the newer one should not be disregarded on the basis of an invalidation through association. We come back to the newer model, and I did not include diagrams with Piaget's developmental schema, and there is a reason for that. That being that it is a fluid model, and there's typology in classification. However, it's very generalized, and so anyone that has tried to draw anything related to Piaget's schemas have come up kind of empty. And I know there are charts that could frame it. We could put it on a timeline, but at the same time, when it became fluid near the end of his career, we had to start to look at child psychology a lot differently, and we had to look at the entire lifespan of human beings as a learning process that does not stop. From my readings, I actually found out that Piaget was vital in implementing things like kindergarten and the sort of factory-oriented, rigid curriculum in the United States. The grade 1 through 7, or 1 through 8, and 9 through 12. Jean Piaget, Piaget's developmental schema. Jean Piaget was a developmental psychologist who believed in genetic epistemology and that children are active thinkers working within schemas. He identified the processes of assimilation, taking in new information, and accommodation, existing structures are changed, as being the basic system in the use of new information. His theories are quite scientific and deal with structured developmental periods as opposed to referential time frames. In a system of 4 stages, he describes the development of the basic mature psyche: sensoromotor, which is 0 to 2 years, as basic conceptualization of absence and presence; pre-operational, 2 to 7 years, the egocentricity of juvenile minds; concrete operational, 7 to 12 years, with a firm logic still devoid of abstract reason; and formal operation, or formal operational, 12 plus years of developed abstract and scientific reasoning. Later in his career, Piaget noted that the age ranges are approximate, and that stages could occur at differentiated periods. These ideas have generated many more. His ideas have generated many more theories, but still fail to garner scientific proof, at least in the molecular and/or neurological level. His methods of investigation also criticized. Interviews versus data study. Asymmetry with the new model. Piaget's work is asymmetrical with the new model presented herein. Again, he is limited to childhood development and sees no changes in wisdom as one ages. This seems contrary to his beliefs, which are based in genetic inheritance, and contradicts a completely dynamic modality, as some have presented his work to be. In relation to the four time frames, they seem to validate the general consensus of a differentiation between 2 and 5 years of age, as well as the pubescent stage being indicative of some formal maturity. A correlation between arrested development and varied stages of growth later in life remains absent in this model. However, Piaget's suggestion that there is a developmental structure to the psyche and the subsequent adaptation of his work give rise to a certain necessity of inclusion, particularly assimilation and accommodation. The model in Chapter 7 is varied from the idea of psychological development being primarily or singularly during childhood.